This is the Fleet Europe podcast, hosted by Jonathan Manning. Today's topic, the EU Data Act and data privacy. Introducing today's guests, Andrea Amico, the founder and CEO of Privacy4Cars, and Christoph Ludewig, the VP EMEA at Geotab. Enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome to this Fleet Europe podcast. In this podcast, we discuss the most relevant trends and news from the fleet and mobility industry. I'm Jonathan Manning, a contributing editor to Nexus, publisher of FleetEurope.com and GlobalFleet.com, an organizer of major industry events like Fleet Europe Days. I'll be the host of this podcast, which today is all about data privacy and protection and the implications of the new EU Data Act for fleets. So, first of all, let me welcome our guests. Christoph Ludewig, VP EMEA of Geotab, and Andrea Amico, founder and CEO of Privacy4Cars. Gentlemen, welcome. Just for our listeners who aren't familiar with your businesses, please could you give a brief outline of what your companies do? Christoph.
Thank you. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for the invitation and a really relevant topic. So Geotab is in the business of fleet telematics, meaning we capture data on behalf of the fleet customers. We analyze those data. We provide products, insights to fleet customers so that they can make informed decisions on how to better manage their fleets.
Perfect. Andrea.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me here. My name is Andrea Amico. Privacy4Cars is the only company in the $10 trillion economy of vehicles that is focused exclusively on privacy and security of personal data collected by cars.
Perfect. Thank you. So, the topic of the day is the new EU Data Act, which came into force officially on the 12th of September. The European Commission describes the Act as, and I'll read, a comprehensive initiative to address the challenges and unleash the opportunities presented by data in the EU, emphasizing fair access and user rights, while ensuring the protection of personal data. So, with that in mind, Christoph, how will this impact the data that's generated that fleets already collect from telematics systems?
Yeah. So that's obviously highly relevant. Working with data from vehicles, this is one of the core things the Data Act had in mind, besides, of course, all other connected products from fridges to smartwatches, whatever. But of course, for our business, highly relevant. Thankfully, we have GDPR for quite a while around, so this is also very mandatory. So we have designed our business and products around that. So Data Act has a little bit of a different nuance to that. It introduces the user of the product and it introduces the concept of a data holder of a product. So the company basically managing the data, which is new and different compared to GDPR. And of course, as we work a lot with the OEMs who are primarily data holders for the data generated by vehicles, this is very relevant for us as well, and we have to make sure that we comply to the Data Act, and we do so, obviously, since it is in effect already. So yeah, it's a topic that's really shaping our business model.
Okay. Andrea, could you elaborate a little about this differentiation between user and owner, data holder?
Well, the Data Act is very different from GDPR. I think hopefully everybody's familiar with the fact that GDPR divides the world in three categories. There's data subjects. These are the people whose data is generated. Then there's controllers. These are the companies are in control of the data. And then there's processors. We're kind of the middle, and they manage the flow of the data. And processors historically never really had much responsibility. It was really controllers helping data subjects manage their rights. The Data Act is different because what it's really meant to do is to allow users, which is not owners, is not data subjects necessarily. It can be anybody. A fleet could be a user. A driver of a fleet could be a user. A future owner of a defleeted car could be a user. Anybody could be a user. Versus the companies that made the device and generated the data from the device. And these are the data holders. And so it's a very different way of looking at the world. I think that the intersection of the Data Act with GDPR is probably the most complex part that companies will have to navigate. It also creates incredible opportunities for companies to be able to access data in ways they haven't really been able to do before, or tear down barriers to entry. You want to switch provider. Very easy to do through the Data Act, at least in theory. And so it's something that everybody in this community should be paying attention to.
Thank you. Christoph, Andrea just mentioned the element that even drivers can be users. How, from an employer's perspective, from a fleet perspective, do you engage drivers in, I suppose, the data privacy issues? How do you persuade them whatever data that you're collecting is reasonable for the employer? What arguments, what's the sales pitch to a driver?
Yeah, very, very good question. So here we have some specificities in the fleet industry. So for fleet vehicles, the fleet is the user from a Data Act perspective, which is, like Andrea pointed out, different to be seen from the GDPR perspective. Under GDPR, you need some kind of legality to use the data, and you have three options. One is contractual rights. So if you have a contract that you can process or use the data, that's maybe not so relevant in the fleet industry. The other one would be consent from the driver, which is, from our perspective as Geotab being a data processor, not a feasible option, because we argue drivers in a fleet context, they are dependent employees, so they can be forced to give consent, and therefore it's a little bit critical to base this on consent. And there's a third option, which is legitimate interest. That allows you to process data, and that's typically what comes to play in the fleet industry. So a transport company, they have an interest in how their assets, their vehicles are being used, being driven, and so there is a legitimate interest that can be applied as the consent piece, if you like.
Okay, thank you. And Andrea, we're already touching on this, but there are lots of parties that see value in this data, the OEM, perhaps the leasing company, the end user fleet. How is that relationship going to work in terms of access to this data? Who gets privileged access or priority access?
Well, in theory, every user has access to this data. I think that the key word is theory, because the act came into effect, as you pointed out, just 5-6 weeks ago. We started to do tests with consumers, the data right holders, right, who are renting cars, and they want to ask, well, what data can I get from my car? And the level of preparedness is not really high right now. I think a lot of companies are trying to still wrangle with how to deal with data. And I think that one of the things that the Data Act is going to bring to bear is two things. One is that I think it's a little bit like the analogy that Warren Buffett always uses about the receding tides. When the receding tides come out, you know who is wearing underpants and who isn't. And I think that we start to see that some ugly bits are starting to show up because we are not quite ready yet. The other thing that it does is that data historically has been considered an asset. And really the Data Act changes dramatically that view, because data is going to be increasingly a liability from one side, but also data is less and less of an asset because it's easy to get raw data. You can ask raw data from anybody. The value is going to be in the intelligence that you apply to this data. And that's where companies really will be able to build value for their customers and their customers' customers.
Mm-hmm. Christoph, I understand that Geotab can take direct feeds from connected cars, that black boxes or the traditional black box is no longer required. Does this mean that fleets can access or can request this fleet data directly from OEMs and you can process it?
Yes, indeed. So that's a huge opportunity. But I have to point out the Data Act governs the raw data.
Okay.
And like Andrea said, the real value comes in what do you do with the data, how do you analyze the data, how do you generate insights from that. That's true. And there's also one other myth I like to clarify here, and we hear this quite often from customers. They think, oh, now Data Act is in place, the data is for free, then OEMs have to provide it for free. While this is technically correct, the data itself is for free, but all the efforts that have to be undertaken to provide that data, like technical systems and all the people you need to do this and so on, so the costs that occur for that at an OEM, that can be charged to customers. at, as it states, like fair and reasonable and non-discriminatory rights. So there comes a cost with that. And that's, I think, is important to understand.
Okay. How would you see that developing?
Oh, I think that that's spot on. Absolutely spot on. One thing that I would like to add, we were discussing this at Cara a couple of days ago, is be friends with your consumers and build trust with them, because you may be able to get access to more data and way more cheaply, most likely free, as opposed to if you are a user that is a corporation. In other words, if you are, say, a fleet, you may discover that you can access more data, more timely, more at zero cost, if the request doesn't come from you, but comes from your drivers. And there's some, again, we're in the early days of testing how companies respond, but I think there's a lot of power of the combination of GDPR and the Data Act. You can really ask for a lot of things. And I think, again, companies will have to think very hard about what data they want to keep, because any data you don't keep and you don't have to share.
Okay.
And I think this opens competitivity issues, it opens compliance issues that honestly we didn't have until 5 or 6 weeks ago. So I think it's going to be an interesting movie to watch.
Okay. There's clearly, from all the data generated by vehicles, different parties have interest in very different elements of that data, be it the leasing company, the fleet, the insurer, the manufacturer, and so on. And yet the Data Act talks about data minimization and purpose limitation. How, from a fleet perspective, should a fleet operator treat that definition?
Yeah, also a very good question. And here again, a differentiation between GDPR and the Data Act. So Data Act talks about basically all data. GDPR is for private data, personal identifiable information. So that's the limitation here. And Data Act and GDPR are in place at the same time, meaning while technically all data would be available, could be shared, then GDPR comes into play and say, well, we have the concept of data minimization, so only use the data that you really need, and the purpose-driven piece of that. So you need to have a purpose to process that data. And this combination I find really powerful, and this is the answer to the question. Yeah, data can be shared, but only if there's a good reason, and if only the data is used for what you need and nothing else.
Thank you. A number of fleets will have international offices. They'll operate in multiple countries. Are there, or what implications might there be if the head office is outside the EU and they want to transfer some of the data that they've captured within the EU? Is that transfer an issue?
Good luck.
Okay.
I mean, the law applies to the EU, right? So if you have a fleet that is partly in the United States and Australia, whatever else, you cannot use it. And again, this is going to be a great tip for you, my friend, because this is the power of using a platform that allows you to have consistent data across multiple fleets, because otherwise you end up with a hodgepodge of data. But even within just the bounds of the of Europe, while the Commission encourages the adoption of standards, it's not technically mandatory, and there is definitely no standard today. Okay. And so you may ask data from 4, 5, 10, 20, 50 different companies. You may end up with 50 different slices. Again, the value is going to be not in the raw data. It's going to be in the intelligence you apply to it. So everybody likes to talk about how the data is the new oil. You're going to have access to raw crude oil easily, but you want to turn it into gasoline, you better be prepared to refine it and have good partners to help you refine it.
I presume Geotab is the ultimate refinery in this situation.
That's what we are. That's what we provide to our customers, indeed. Yeah.
I told you were like the
Do you see much any issues for fleets that want to take data or combine it with data captured from outside the EU?
I have nothing to add to what Andrea said there. So it's really Data Act and GDPR are European regulations. There are other regulations in other countries and regions which we would then have to comply with. So, yeah.
Okay. Can I ask, what implications are there for fleets are turning over their vehicles every 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5? As soon as the vehicle leaves, what are their responsibilities about deleting, or I suppose deleting is the word, deleting data for vehicles that they no longer own?
Well, under the Data Act, you have no obligations whatsoever.
Okay.
There's no data minimization requirement. What is going to be apparent to everybody is that it's extremely wise to minimize your data. And the policies that today are very common for laptops and servers and mobile phones that companies have, which is get rid of as much data as you can when you deplete that device. It's mandatory under GDPR. I think that people will start to realize that's a very, very bright idea. Let me give you an example, right? Some of the requests that we help some consumers place is to go to rental companies and say, I synced my phone. I would like to get a record of everything that was downloaded from my phone. Companies have an obligation under the Data Act to provide that data. And this is going to be a very interesting catch-22, which we're very eager to watch, because if they don't provide it, they're violating the Data Act. There can be a complaint based on violation of the Data Act. If they do comply, now they may be sharing data of the previous 10 renters that they never deleted data from. And this is going to create a very big legal pickle. And again, I think that this is going to demonstrate once more that getting rid of data of consumers is not, or data subjects, is not just a legal obligation to GDPR. It's a very, very smart thing to do under the Data Act, because you don't have to essentially face what is a mini forensic analysis that now you're mandated to do under the law.
Christoph, how would you advise fleets to tackle this issue of how much historic data they retain within the business?
Yeah. So once they sell or take a vehicle out of their fleet, they should, of course, then disconnect that vehicle from sending data. That's typically, they tell us, I'm selling this vehicle, disconnect it, or plug out the device, whatever is relevant here, so then no more data is captured. There are a few exceptions how to store data, for example, for, I don't know, legal purposes, tax receipts, or so you might have to store data a little bit longer. But here I would really advise comply to those legal rules, which can be GDPR, but can also be outside of GDPR, and then you're safe. And delete everything that you don't need any longer. And that's actually in our sphere of doing this. We act as a data processor for the customers. So they tell us, delete the data, we delete the data, everything is done.
Okay. And for fleets that are sitting on historic data now, is the Data Act retrospective in your opinion?
It's in place, it's in act, it affects all products that are in the market. So from the day it became effective, you have to comply to that. And I must say, working with data is something Geotab has done for 25 years now. So we consider this to be a core part of our business model. If we don't do this right, we are out of business very soon. So that's really, really important. Yeah.
I just want to clarify for the audience, if you want data from the day before the Data Act came into effect, well, you can ask, but companies can say no, and it's perfectly okay for them to say no. So it's really something that starts September going forward.
Okay, thank you. This is clearly a fiendishly complicated subject, and we're rushing through it to some extent in the... what key questions ought I to have asked? What should we have addressed? If you had to sum up some advice for someone who's sitting responsible for a fleet, they're aware that there's been a Data Act. What's the next step? Andrea, what would you suggest?
The number one piece of advice I have for people is the EU actually gave guidance on the day in which the law came into effect, which is, never too late, I guess. But they published this document. It's 11 pages long. It is an excellent read. What I recommend everybody at Cara is, even if you're not a lawyer, read the 11 pages, go to bed, read them again the next day, and you will have ideas on things you could not think before was possible with your business. Some of them will be great, some of them not so great. But there's a lot of value in reading the documents. So that will be the first piece of advice. And the second one, I think I made the point clearly, minimize data, especially when it's personal data, because it carries no value. It's just a liability, so just get rid of it.
And Christoph, what would your takeaways be for fleet operators facing this issue?
Yeah. So what I would say is always see Data Act and GDPR in combination. That's very important. Second thing is, Data Act does not mean you have a paradise of data and everyone has to provide everything you ever wanted to have. That's not the case. And third part is, don't think everything is for free now. There is still a cost associated to that.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Andrea, for your participation in this podcast of Fleet Europe for 2025. And thank you too to the audience for listening and watching. Follow us please via fleeteurope.com for more insights on fleet and mobility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.